Water Management District's February board meeting. It is on. It is on. I'm just not speaking into it. Arlene, may we have roll call, please?
Director Adams. Here. Director Edwards.
Here.
Director Evans.
Here.
Director Byrne. Here. And Director Riley. Here. Director Potter and Director Hoffman are absent.
Okay. I'd like to ask everybody to stand and for Director Riley to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next I'd like to ask for any additions or corrections to the agenda. I do have one. Under item number 10, I'd like to change the title to remove the words activities in the, so that it will just read, consider authorizing a notice of intent to adopt why did I pick the long one? To adopt a mitigated negative declaration and the first reading for ordinance number 181, amending district rules and regulations to modify the extent of the Carmel River riparian corridor. Okay, maybe don't remove the. Are there any other additions or corrections? Okay. Do we need to move to approve the?
Move approval.
Thank you. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Motion carries. Next on our agenda then is oral communications. Anyone wishing to address the board on consent calendar, information items, closed session items, or matters not listed may do so now. 3 minutes. Okay.
Good evening, Mary Ann Carbone. And at several of your town hall meetings and at the last board meeting, I spoke on behalf of my city council and community. I highlighted a number of questions and issues of concern, and I provided the clerk of the board this evening another letter reiterating our 5 major requests. I will not read the letter this evening, but I'd like to make the following points. And that is, number 1, please provide a written answer to my letters. I would always reply to a letter your board would write to my city in a public meeting and define what this board would describe as feasible. If you do not define it, how will you recognize it? And share with our constituents the risks and costs associated with each step of the condemnation process. Share with the public which assets of CalAm that you plan to condemn. And you are spending over $500,000 on consultants. Please identify them and what their scope of work will be. And finally, share with the public your planned financing mechanism and respond positively to my request that the voters have an opportunity to approve future indebtedness and conduct a vote on the financing, whether legally required or not. Am I past my time?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. And from a process point of view, please reinstate a technical advisory committee made up of 1 representative from each city. Also consider a joint working meeting with the mayor's authority to jointly explore the definition of feasibility before you make a final decision. Thank you for your time, and I await your response so I can report back to my city.
Thank you.
Dan Turner, Monterey. Last month, Mr. Narigi and Mr. Rowley expressed concern for affordable housing and jobs for working people. And while that concern for working folks is touching, we just don't need 13 to 15,000 acre-feet of water a year. Right now, with the cost of water and our water bills being 0, we use 9 to 10,000 acre-feet a year. Soon, about 3,500 of those acre-feet will be coming from the purified water system at a cost of about 3,000 acre-feet per year. Forget for now about the cost of CalAm's desal water, if it ever produces anything. which will cost, it says, about $4,500 an acre foot, but which others, using better statistics, put it over $7,000 an acre foot. Just forget about that for now. Unless peninsula residents and businesses are already using the most irreducible amount of water possible, which I doubt, our water usage will decrease due to the price increases caused by the cost of purified water. How much? I don't know. But I think maybe the Water Management District should see if there's any way to figure that out. This predicted decrease in our water usage isn't a figment of my imagination. It's economics 101. As the cost increases, the usage decreases. This isn't rocket science, and it is irresponsible, pardon me, for this board to ignore these facts and continue to pretend that what I'm saying just isn't so. Last month I said that the process by which Directors Hoffman and Potter was selected was rather smelly. I didn't have time to say that although Director Hoffman was voted for by 3 of the most pro-Cal-Am anti-public water directors on the board at that time, my wife Jean and I asked to meet with him, and he was gracious enough to accept. Not everyone is, you know. We ended up spending over an hour and a half with Director Hoffman, during which time we had a frank and honest exchange of views, and although I can't say that I came away with the feeling that he is firmly in the public water corner, I do feel he may not share the regressive views of those 3 who voted for him. He seems to be a lovely fellow, and those feelings were only reinforced by the intelligent questions he asked and suggestions he made at last month's meeting. As for Dave Potter, what can I say? If he had a shred of integrity, he'd resign and let the mayors take another vote with all of them present. But Dave's not going to resign. So I guess we'll just have to drag him behind us across the finish line and into the bright future of public water. Just one more thing. Have you noticed how everyone who is saying that the people who passed Measure J, that the people passed Measure J because they wanted to save money, and that if we can't save money from day one, we shouldn't proceed with moving toward public water. That all those, all those people are on record as having opposed Measure J? What do you suppose that means?
Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Greetings, members of the board. My name is Paul Bruno. I'm a resident of Monterey. I did not intend to speak at the beginning here, but I feel compelled to. I attended the meeting whereby not this particular board, but the board appointed Mr. Hoffman, and it was an open process. It was a thorough process, and to have it mischaracterized by another speaker is disgusting. Also, the way personal attack on one of your board members who's not here tonight, I also find that to be disgusting. I appreciate your efforts. I appreciate everything that this board does, and I hope that we can move ahead without any more of that sort of activity.
Thank you, Mr. Bruno.
Good evening. My name is Michael Bear. I live in Carmel Valley, and here we are again in the slow conversation. I've said this a number of times, but many of you a couple of you that are here are new to this board, maybe haven't heard it, and Mr. Potter, Mr. Hoffman haven't either. By that I mean, I get to speak for 3 minutes once a month, so it's one-way conversation. It's pretty slow. And I think I've been here. I was thinking about it about 20 of the last 30 months, so maybe an hour over the last 2.5 years that I've got a chance to speak. So here we are again. I want to reflect back on last month, too. And last month we learned that the community's divided. It's kind of riffing off of former speaker, the other speaker. The community's divided, and that the immediate savings was the number one answer of both the highest and lowest priorities. The number one answer was save money immediately, and the number one answer in the number 7 was that's the lowest priority. And I just want to point out, immediate savings is the highest hurdle of a cost analysis. And it seems safe to me to generalize that the no on J would vote for the immediate savings, and that those who voted yes on J would put it way down the list, even last, including me. So who was against J? Organized commercial interests, the business coalition. The same people who have been relentlessly pushing for an extraordinarily expensive fatally flawed desal plant. The ones that are seemingly unconcerned that residential ratepayers have the highest rates in the nation, they're the ones asking for the immediate savings. There's only one explanation. They must receive some benefit from the status quo. The status quo is that CalAm and the CPUC provide them with some sort of perceived advantage which they're fighting very hard to maintain. And so they attempt to get into their heads about trying to figure out why that is, what's the advantage, is there money, what's going on? That's merely speculation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear. Anyone else wishing to address the board?
Good evening, Chair Evans and directors of the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. I'm Jerry Edlin. I'm a resident of Delray Oaks. In 2009, the state issued a cease and desist order imposing a deadline to reduce water withdrawals from the Carmel River by 60%. After observing that the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District at that time was doing absolutely nothing to develop an alternative water supply, the 6 mayors of the Monterey Peninsula came together and decided to form a joint powers authority to secure replacement water. All founding mayors, of which I was one at the time, believed that the Water Management District Board was being controlled by directors who were basically no growth. The no growth element in our community is figured out: if you eliminate water, you stop growth. No water, no growth. Since that time, the Water Authority has worked tirelessly to secure replacement water, and the authority has been successful. And to be fair, after the formation of the Water Authority, new pro-water directors were elected to this board, the Water Management District Board, and the 2 organizations have worked cooperatively to develop new replacement water ever since. The Certificate of Public Conveyance and Necessity, or CPCN, from the State Water Resources Control Board has been issued water desalinization plant. And maybe, but not so fast, enter the attempt to take over CalAm. Yes, our residents voted to have a feasibility study done. However, they expected the feasibility study to be fair and impartial. Unfortunately, that may not be the case. The former president of Public Water Now, Mr. George Riley, who I like and I consider an outstanding individual, in this case we disagree, he's been elected to serve on this board, and thus the board's composition, and it could be argued pro-water focus, has once again changed. You have before you the task to develop a feasibility study over whether to take over CalAm, and yet you have a board member who led the effort to take over CalAm, influencing voting on this board during takeover deliberations. Whatever decision you make, whether to take over CalAm or not, you want the public perception of the process to be fair. Having Mr. Riley continue to vote on this board during this process will destroy your credibility and create great dissension within our community. Finally, there's the public perception. There may be strong motivations by some members of this board to do everything they can to kill the CalAm desalinization project, including joining lawsuits against the plant. Why? If the desal plant is killed, the amount of public funds required to buy CalAm would be considerably less than if a buyout of CalAm had to include the desal plant. Please leave the desal plant alone. It's taken us over 8 long years to develop an approved alternative source of water to flush it away right now. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Edelman. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Is there anyone else wishing to address the board? All right, I'm going to close oral communications. Oh, okay. So, hang on 1 second, please. 1 second. Before you begin, I would like to restate the rules of oral communications. Maybe they're not rules, but they're rules now. There will be no personal attacks against anybody in this room or outside of this room. You can disagree with policy. I am happy to hear your disagreements on policy, but I will not hear anything that insults any person.
I agree with you 100%. So thank you for reminding us.
Now you may begin.
Okay. My name is Anna Thompson, and I live in Carmel. I really concerned about people saying that we need this desalination plant that it was approved by the PUC. It's a very expensive plant to build, and also they're going to charge us a lot more money for the water. And I'm saying there is an alternative that is much less expensive and gives us all the water that we need. So why is it that we have to follow what CalAm is proposing when for the community is better, there is a better alternative? So this is a question to you all. You have heard a lot of reasons why there is a problem with this desalination plant. And there are scientific reasons why is not the best plan to get water. And there is also a law, I understand, a regulation that says that any desalination plant should be public owned, not by a private corporation. So we have the water, we have the alternative by using the expansion of the Pure Water Monterey, and we have that to provide for the water that we need. So why do we want to still consider a 380 or whatever it is $1 million plant when we could succeed in getting the actual water that we need with only paying a fraction of that price? So I ask you, first of all, there is no bias. CalAm is biased. It's biased to their owners or the shareholders. Why should we be biased for what is best for our community? So why do we want to request that people that are for the public water, they should be recused from voting? You know, that is to me no right, is unjust, because we all in here for the same reason, to have the right amount of water that we need and the most affordable price. So I really appreciate you considering to actually approve the expansion of the Pure Water Monterey. That would be the best alternative for all of us, including the hospitality that is all for the CalAm side of it. So you would do us all a disservice if you not consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Anyone else? Okay, then I will close the oral communications portion of the meeting.
Madam Chair, if I could address one comment that was made during the oral communication, and
Yes,
that
sir.
concerned Director Riley and whether he has a disabling conflict of interest. I can tell you that I did meet with Mr. Riley after the apparent results of the election and before he was seated. We discussed in detail his past actions. We did a careful assessment as to whether or not that formed a conflict of interest or would force his recusal. Mr. Riley shared with me his actions that he had done and his planned future actions. I have no question whatsoever that his participation is fully appropriate and there is no requirement for recusal whatsoever.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I'd like to move on to the consent calendar portion. Is any of the directors wishing to pull any items for consideration?
Pull item number 3, please.
Okay, any other directors? Any members of the public wishing to pull any items?
Move approval of the consent agenda with the exception of item 3.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Director Edwards.
Thank you. Just looking at this on page 17, that last little paragraph sort of got me a little bit excited that we're building a building, and somebody sitting up there saying that it's not enough for another treatment to go in that building. So I wonder, how come we're not waiting to size the building where we can get all the treatments in that we need to do for that?
Director Edwards, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking is the proposed building sized for the chemical treatments or the existing building?
The proposed. When you got somebody coming saying that, well, the third treatment will not fit in the building, how come we not enlarging the building where all the treatments can go in that building?
So the existing building can't handle 3 treatment processes. The proposed building is actually, because there could be a third treatment process, the preliminary plans have had to be expanded by an additional 8 feet to accommodate 3 treatment processes. So the proposal is to build a building that will accommodate all the treatment processes that are required to fully treat the water.
So we're building one that size, so all 3 can,
We're building the right size. Yeah, it's just bad drafting, I guess. The existing building cannot accommodate all of the needs of that site at this point, so
Right.
that's why the new building is.
okay, and it's enough room on the property that we get all these treatments in for those new ASR wells.
There's enough room to build a building down near General Jim Moore to treat all of the wells, yes.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about another expansion because, is this reimbursed by Callan?
The capital funds that are needed are not reimbursed by CalAm. The district owns the site and the facilities, but the operations and maintenance are reimbursed by CalAm.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment. On this item, I was a new member of the committee that reviewed it. So was another member of this board. So there were 2 out of 3 new members on this committee that reviewed this issue. I wanted to just congratulate staff. I want to make a particular comment, though. It was a little bit of an agitated meeting, if maybe energized or would be a better word for it. But it went quite a while on this subject, and I appreciate you rewriting much of the material here, so it was much more understandable. And it's also a more lengthy memo, but I apologize for that part. But anyway, I thought the result was fine. So I move the action of item 3.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, number 5, General Manager's report.
There's a report in between. We've invited.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry, Mr. Shudo. Please, I beg your forgiveness. So a report on Pure Water Monterey from Paul Shudo, General Manager of Monterey One Water. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Even though Molly was going to just skip right over me, appreciate that. And I guess I appreciate the rules or policies of how to act. I'll have to get rid of my slides that were denigrating Tom Brady. So.
No, please leave those in. Okay. Please. Let's just see the whole presentation on those slides.
Thank you for this opportunity to give you a brief update. I will try to move through relatively quickly. I know many of you have seen this before. It's generally an update on Pure Water Monterey project, where we're at, and then some water quality objectives once this comes online later this year. So with that, Pure Water Monterey will be producing about 3,500 acre-feet of advanced purified water for injection into the Seaside Basin, and then subsequent extraction by CalAm and distribution in their service area. You know, depending on the demands that we talk about, it represents somewhere between 22% or up to 36% of the current water demands in the CalAm service area. In addition, it's not just a potable water supply project, it's also an additional water supply for our current agricultural irrigation in the Salinas Valley. Since 1998, the agency has been recycling about 12,000 to 14,000 acre-feet of water for agricultural irrigation. As part of this project, we're going to try to increase that somewhere around 4,000 or 4,400 acre-feet. So if and when the 12,000 acres of ag land out in Castroville can accept that water, they can get up to 18,000 feet. There's 4 discrete projects within the Pure Water Monterey program. There's source water diversions, which are in the reclamation ditch and Blanco drain. The advanced water purification facility, which is at our treatment plant out in Marina by the landfill. And that's truly the large beast of this project. It's about a $50 million component. The conveyance pipeline, which was constructed by our partners Marina Coast Water District and Monterey One Water, paid for about 72% of it, and then, of course, injection wells in the Seaside Basin. In total, we're about 85% done with this thing. And the current schedule shows us producing water at the end of June. That may slide a little bit, but just to put it in perspective, this will be online in 4 to 5 months. So it's definitely, it's here, it's happening, and we are all getting ready for it. So there's always talk, and I think many of you have heard it, what are the source waters that we're using? Certainly unutilized wastewater, that which isn't used for agricultural irrigation. Agricultural drainage water, I mentioned those source water facilities in the Blanco Drain and Wreck Ditch. Agricultural wash water, and we go buy our lettuce at the stores in the little bags. It's all pre-washed. That generates between 3 million and 4 million gallons of water per day in the Salinas Valley. And then a small fraction of storm water that goes through those same facilities in Salinas that will be brought to our treatment facility. Now we just get to look at some pretty pictures. Well, I guess if you like construction, so Larry, you probably love these. Construction, this is the Blanco Drain, a diversion structure and pump station that's in the drain. As with all construction of this magnitude, there's little bumps and hiccups along the way, and we are addressing those and still have the schedule to be June 22nd. On this one in particular, there were 20 piles drilled into the ground. It turned out that 17 of them were not quite right. So a number of yeah, it's a high percentage, huh? It's like back in math class in high school. Exactly. So there had to be a number of retrofits and additional engineering changes that had to occur, but we are on schedule with this piece. Reclamation ditch, much smaller diversion structure, on schedule. The biggest issue here is just when we can actually be in that drain and not, based on fish and wildlife. But once again, on schedule to be done in May of this year. The Advanced Water Purification Facility. So this is the heart of the project. This is where all the treatment processes occur, whether it be, coming in ozone treatment, microfiltration, reverse osmosis, and then advanced oxidation and UV disinfection. It's about a 3-acre plot of land that is on our treatment plant site. Our treatment plant's just to the left of this, the right of this picture. And this here is about 85% done. Just actually, we love these pictures. One of our chief plant operator actually has a drone with a high resolution camera. So we've been getting some great pictures. The conveyance pipeline, as I mentioned, Marina Coast, partner agency, installed this 7-mile-long pipeline, goes from our treatment plant in Marina out to the Seaside groundwater aquifer where our injection facilities are. That project is complete. There are some administrative things that have to happen, change orders, et cetera, but all pipe is in the ground and tanks are up, as you see. The injection wells, not that exciting a picture, except you have a great ocean view there. We busted it into 2 different phases, and I don't know if Maureen is here or not. So Maureen Hamilton from the Water Management District has been managing this project, just as one of the partners in this. She's been doing a great job. Phase 1 is complete. We use the data from Phase 1 to drill some additional wells in Phase 2, which is ongoing as we speak. Once again, to be completed in June. Excuse me. Monterey Pipeline, there was much discussion on that about a year or so ago, maybe, is complete and allows that transfer of water that we are putting into the Seaside Basin by Cal-Am. So many of the questions I receive, even now, after doing these presentations for the last 4 years, is, hey, not so sure about this quality of water. And just for information for everyone that we have all the same data, our source waters were sampled for 435 constituents, 24 pesticides. All of them were below, or I guess, how can you phrase this? More is below drinking water levels on every single one of them. So then I have questions of, you know, is this water really good to drink? Well, it's been happening all over the world. In California alone, there are 6 other full facilities online, not pilot studies, not temporary ones. We're talking Orange County Sanitary District, Orange County Sanitary and Water District, which does 100 million gallons a day of recycled water in Orange County. West Basin Municipal Water District, LA San, there's up and down California. This has been happening since about 1998. Obviously, treatment trains have changed in that period of time, but this is a proven viable process. Another question I get is, well, what about other stuff out there? And yeah, there is other stuff out there. Contaminants of emerging concern. And so we, not just our agency, but the industry as a whole, the water industry as a whole, work with the state board, the Division of Drinking Water, tracking what are those contaminants of emerging concern, what are the potential health effects, how do we actually sample and monitor, not just for our sort of project, but every drinking water project in the state of California. So these are things that we are on top of and we are constantly modifying. Our permit for our discharge, which was approved for the discharge into the Seaside Basin, was approved 2 years ago. They're still modifying it as new data comes in. We have a new requirement for PFAS, which is an acronym for a really long phrase, that wasn't there 2 years ago. Division of Drinking Water says, hey, this is something that we are concerned with. We don't know the health effects yet, but we want to keep tabs of it. So just from a purity and safety perspective, the water coming out of here, as many of you know, is as pure as any water out there based on the treatment levels that we are putting it through. This is just confusing. See, are you paying attention? Yeah. So this is, let's see. So the treatment process is relatively complex. It is controlled via instrumentation, supervisory control and data acquisition. The same sort of stuff that we have controlling our existing treatment plant, our 10 pump stations, in our control room that's manned 24/7. This slide is from our demo facility, and these are the sort of data that our people look at on a continual basis or are flagged on a continual basis. It integrates with all the other data that we have. If you ever come to our control room, which we're actually remodeling right now, there's about 15 screens, not this large, but 15 screens in our control room with pump station data, treatment plant data, and of course the advanced water purification data. Instrumentation is key because of the complexity of the system. Now, if any of these things flag to a point where, hey, the process is jeopardized, there's an automatic shutdown. Once again, going to the safety and purity of the water.
What shuts it down?
Automatic valves. Automatic valves.
Sensors in there, it gets bad reading.
Just shuts down the water supply. Yeah. So as an example, and I'm sure Callahan can attest to this, your reverse osmosis, that's really high pressure. So when you have a differential pressure that all of a sudden goes from 500 psi to 200 psi, that means there's a break in there. That means you're having cross-contamination water, that thing shuts down immediately. So you're not getting that through the process and pumped out to the Seaside Basin. Those sort of safety belt and suspenders, if you will, are built in throughout the process. Just more computer screens. So quality assurance, real-time online monitoring throughout the process. We are actually having to hire a sampling person just to run around and grab samples just for the sheer number that we have. Some are on daily basis, some are weekly, some are monthly. It's all built into the permit that identifies what has to occur when. And then of course, in the Seaside Basin, like the Water Management District does currently, there'll be ongoing groundwater monitoring in those monitoring wells. Just some general updates that you may or may not know. Our NPDES permit, our discharge permit to the ocean, was modified to accept our concentrate. That was approved by the regional board back in December, so we have a new discharge permit that allows for the advanced water purification concentrate, as well as our effluent. And then in October of last year, we got our independent advisory panel back together. So what that is, we have, frankly, and I don't think this is overstating it, the best consultants in the country, if not the world, in the various areas of treatment processes, hydraulics, et cetera, designing this thing. We have Division of Drinking Water within the State Water Resources Control Board overseeing us. Probably the most stringent water quality standards in the country, if not the world. And then we hired an independent advisory panel, experts around the country, to sort of be a third-party review of all this, just to make sure, are you doing things properly? Is your operation maintenance plan appropriate, and so on. We convened them again last October just to go over everything right now as we are launching into startup. There's been a lot of talk, and I think it was brought up earlier tonight, about the potential expansion of Pure Water. CPUC had requested back in August of 17, can you look into expansion? If so, what could you do and how would you do it? So actually, with the Water Management District and ourselves, we funded a study to look at the feasibility of an expansion, and a report was generated that addressed the 9 decision criteria on the first phase for Pure Water. That report was completed, was submitted to the CPUC in May of 2018. What we focused in on was what we felt was the most economic and most viable option, which was an additional 2,250 acre-feet per year. As I think one of the speakers mentioned, the CPUC came out and said, we're going to certify the EIR, CPCN for advancement of the desal plant. At that point, our board decided we're not going to work on expansion anymore. We have direction from the regulatory agencies. So that's where that stands. Along the way, so by no means is it one or the other for us, we concurrently have been working with CalAm on a number of items to advance the completion of the desal plant. One of those items is the brine mixing structure, which CalAm is paying for. We are designing with our consultant. It's going to be on our site. They'll pay for the construction, and that allows the desal brine to be mixed with our effluent and discharged into our outfall. In addition, there is modification to our outfall which will be necessary because brine is far more aggressive than treated wastewater, and we want to make sure that that asset that our customers have paid for is there for the long run. One other item that we're working with CalAm on is yet another modification to our discharge permit when we start accepting desal brine. With that, I can certainly open up for questions, or we can get to the slides about Tom Brady, whichever you'd like.
Well, you know what my answer is going to be.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Shudo. Directors, do you have any questions?
Thank you. You said production water this summer, June, July. Is that the water that's going to go where? Tell me where.
Into the seaside basin. Injected into the seaside groundwater basin.
And then when would it be available for consumption?
So there is a water purchase agreement between Monterey One, Water Management District, and CalAm. In that, there's some definitions. What we need to do is put 1,000 acre-feet of operational reserve in the ground first. So the schedule as we have it, we start producing water June 22nd. Plus or minus, we're doing about 300 acre-feet a month. So first 3 months, we'll get about 1,000 acre-feet in the ground. So that's July, August, September. So in theory, around October, CalAm can start extracting as we continue to put water in the ground. But that's the schedule as of right now. Does that answer your question?
That's good, because I knew there was a time period. I lost track of it. My other question is on your last slide, I believe you're talking about brine mixing structure.
Yes.
Is that specifically tied to the desal project, or is that required regardless of whether it's desal or not?
It's only for the desal project. We do not need that for our project. For Pure Water Monterey, there is a concentrate, a waste product that comes off the treatment process, but all the modeling that we have done and worked with the regional board on, we did not need any additional mixing because of the small quantity and relatively buoyant nature of the discharge.
Thank you.
Any other directors?
Thank you, Chair. I want to first thank you for coming to Seaside, explaining your sides and giving us a slideshow. Just a couple of questions. What is the most important part of Phase 2 to be completed? If we do Phase 2, what is that most important part that needs to be done? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I love it. Interesting question. So the most important part, in my opinion, is probably starting the environmental work. And frankly, we have started it as part of that study that we did last year, but to continue and finish it. And the reason I say that, the schedule, if we were to look at that report from last year, the schedule shows about 2.5 years from when we get going to when we produce water. So if for some reason the desal plant is not happening and we still have that CDO on December 31st of 2021, we want to be able to get water in the ground on the second phase, as you've said, by that time frame. So starting and finishing the environmental work as soon as possible in order to meet that schedule would, in my opinion, be the most important part.
Okay, and to do construction, how long would that take, to get the construction done?
So it's interesting. The construction, there's a couple different components to the construction, but I'm just going to say a little over a year.
Okay.
So for the treatment plant itself, there's some space in those existing buildings that we're seeing pictures of that we could put additional treatment trains in. And when we say expansion, what we're really meaning is that plant that you saw is 5 million gallons a day. The expansion is 7 million gallons a day. So it's not this giant expansion. It's expanding, but not to a great degree. So the construction is truly a couple more treatment trains, a couple more tanks, and then injection wells in the Seaside Basin. And then in our discussions with Cal-Am, there would need to be more extraction wells so they could accommodate more water coming out of the ground in the Seaside Basin.
And we could get all that done within a year? Or would it be longer?
So the components for pure water, meaning the injection facilities and the treatment plant modifications, is about a year. I don't know that, well, I certainly don't know if Cal-Am could get the additional extraction wells in or the environmental work done for those. And I don't know that we've actually discussed it to that level of detail. It was more conceptual.
Okay, and my last question, could we put additional water in there for public benefit? 1,000 acre feet and then you get a drought. I know, can the district and next door, you, put additional water in there for public benefit so we can have that project going? If we had to borrow the money or whatever, get that project going in case the fallback happens that Cal-Am can't deliver desal.
So I take your question to mean, could we put more water in there with an expansion? Could we just be putting water in?
Right.
Yes. Right. I may caveat that with someone has to pay for that water, and the way pay for production of it, and the way our water purchase agreement is now, Water Management District is on the hook for water that stays in the ground that Cal-Am doesn't extract. Mm-hmm. Certainly that is for public benefit, but yeah, I'd be running over here with my hand out looking for money.
Well, I think the public will be running too if
That's
they know how
true.
much it's going to cost them
Yeah.
for desal. Okay, thank you, sir, and I appreciate you coming over.
Thank you.
I just have one question.
Actually, Mary was next.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. So you had mentioned that the most important part of Phase 2 is the EIR, essentially. Can you tell me what is stopping that from moving forward now? What's the issue with that, and what's the timeline?
So the reason we're not moving forward with it is the ruling from the CPUC last September, which stated desal's moving forward, pure water expansion didn't have enough information for it. So there was no regulatory trigger for our board to say, yes, we're going to move forward and want to put money into it. So I guess the bottom line is we're not contributing funds on something that, exactly. We're not contributing funds to move that forward because the direction we're taking from the CPUC is, yeah, that's the reason.
So, I guess the big question is with Pure Water Monterey that comes online, plus the expansion, does that have the potential of equaling the desal plant and supplying water for the next 20 to 50 years? I mean, the source waters are the issue. Do we have access to enough source water?
So, okay, I'm hearing multiple questions there. One is, no, it does not equal the desal. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in their EIR, the 6.4 MGD desal plant is going to produce about 6,200 acre feet of water, 6,300 acre foot. We wouldn't produce that much, pure and simple. What we'd be able to produce with the expansion is 5,750 acre feet. To the question of is it enough for the demands, I think it depends on the different demands. Through the CPUC process, there were some parties saying it was lower, as people here said. I think the Water Management District in testimony said about 12,200 acre feet. I think Cal-Am said 14,100. 14,400. So it truly depends on what the demands are, on what's necessary. And at this point, we have not looked at the demand side of things because we certainly don't feel that's our mission. In reference to the source waters, that's besides product or water quality, that's probably the biggest question I always get. And for the Pure Water Monterey project, the current one, with our agreement with the Water Resources Agency, those waters, in my opinion, are secure, and we can certainly go down the contractual arrangement of why I think that. When you look at the expansion, within that report that we produced last May, there's more than enough water to get this done. The reason I say that is the expansion is truly 230 acre feet per month. It's a relatively small amount in the grand scheme of things. And some projects we're currently doing in conjunction with the city of Salinas, as well as accessing some contractually obligated water that we've never used before, but is sitting out there. And then, of course, the 6,000 to 8,000 acre feet of wastewater that goes out to the ocean every year. And using all that, yeah, we certainly feel it's secure. Certainly our staff, which has worked on it with the Water Resources Agency, also say it's secure for the future. Now, I know other things I hear is, well, there could be a drought. Yeah, there could be a drought. And I still think running a wastewater treatment plant, we still got 17 million gallons a day of wastewater in the drought, in the worst drought that we've seen. The ag land out there, the water that was coming through Blanco Drain and Wreck Ditch, they still irrigate it because it's frankly highly profitable land. And so there's still water coming out of there. The other thing I hear is ag wash water is going to go away, whether they're going to move to Arizona or find something else to not wash with, but irradiate it. That's always a possibility. But I also talk to our counterparts in the city of Salinas that say, no, we're having discussions for more development, for more production facilities in Salinas. That water level is going to go up. So is it going to zero because we're going to use UV light, or is it going to increase per Salinas? Personal opinion is it's probably somewhere in the middle.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Shudo. Appreciate that. Very informative.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so now I will turn it over to our general manager.
All right. Well, I would like to make the point that I want to thank Dave Stolt for all the work he did to make this project happen.
Paul's now left the room, so we can talk about the 3 times we saved.
Paul Shudo, can you please return?
Yeah, I'll be brief.
All right, just come back one more second.
Pretend I didn't hear that.
No.
Dave just wanted to let you know that Director Byrne and the rest of the board want to thank him for his part that he played in the Pure Water Monterey project.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
And we barely touched on it, but so much of this project is grant funded, and there will be some news, exciting news next Monday.
We should probably say it now.
Yeah, should we tell?
I think so.
All right.
So we found out last week that the project was awarded $4.1 million of a WIN grant through Bureau of Reclamation Title 16. I think many of you have actually gone to the Bureau offices with us back in DC. Dave and I have done that a number of times as well, meeting with Bureau staff. This was a huge win for us. No pun intended, since the grant is WIIN. Last year we applied for the grant. It's highly competitive. 3 entities got it last year. We don't know how many got it this year, but we were one of them. And I think that they were trying to divvy up $20 million, and we got 4.1 million of it. So it's a testament to everyone around here.
Go home.
Thank you. I'm not listening anymore.
As we're waiting for there we go. So this is just a quick review of compliance with regulatory frameworks. I don't have the remote, so if you just go to the next one. Sure. Thank you. So this is production from the Carmel River Basin and Seaside Groundwater Basin. You can see that the target, the first line versus actual, we're in a very good place year to date, where the target is exceeding actual. An interesting point of order here is that we're about 125 acre feet above last year, but we've done 270 acre feet of injection. Oh, yeah. Yep, you're right. It's covered up. So where we are relative to last year is we're 125 acre feet higher in production, but these numbers include injection to ASR. So through the end of January, we were at 270 acre feet of injection this year versus 0 last year. So what you're seeing is a reflection of water going to storage. Water projects that we've been tracking, really no change from last month. Because of the well and the discharge requirements at Sand City Desal, they're still a little off relative to the target. But this is a 4-month period. We target 25 acre feet per month, and there's only been 66 actual acre feet produced. And we'll continue to monitor that, but I think until new source wells get drilled, we're going to have a continuing issue with full production from that. Using production for customer service as a proxy for demand, the first 4 months are showing about 161 acre feet below last year. So I know we had some concerns at this time last year due to the uptick in demand, so we're kind of back to where we were the year before last year. And then down at the bottom, you can see the rationing trigger, which is production relative to an established production limit. We've got about 300 acre feet of buffer, so we're looking pretty good there as well. On the precipitation side, keeping in mind that this chart is only through the end of January, we had 13.42 inches through the end of January, which is about 120% of long-term average. But I can tell you, so far in February, we've had 11.6 inches. Typical for February is about 4.5 inches. So we are already at a total for the year that's in excess of our long-term average of about 23 inches per year. We're already at 25 inches. So expect this chart to probably have a different scale on it when I bring it to you next month. And you can see that in this chart. This is rain gauge up at the San Clemente Dam. This is available on our website for people who are precipitation wonks. And you can see that February is just blue bar after blue bar after blue bar, with the single largest daily storm of over 2.5 inches in early February. On the unimpaired stream flow, suffice to say that through the end of January, we're at 135% of long-term average. It's probably going to break the charts when February is reflected. And then finally, ASR, I misspoke to the weekly that was posted. I thought we had gotten to about 20 acre-feet per day. It looks like we maxed out closer to 16. We're currently tracking between 10 and 13 acre-feet per day. We're at 488 acre-feet through yesterday, so would expect to break the 500 barrier before the weekend with today and tomorrow. And we look forward to, we're still meeting both of our water permit requirements, so we're able to inject to any one of the 4 wells based on whichever permit we designate as controlling. So we're in pretty good shape. I know Chris Cook's been quoted, and John's been quoted, and I've been quoted, and I think we're all in agreement that having a brand new pipeline to play with is great, but we're still kind of tweaking it and learning it. So we're not at the maximum capacity we could be, but you know, it's a new toy and relearning how the system operates, and you know, we hope that we continue to get enough flow that we can kind of continue to improve on maximizing the injection. So that concludes the report for this month.
Directors, any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Source wells for Sand City ASR. Who is responsible for drilling those?
Okay, well, the source wells are all existing Cal-Am wells on the Carmel River. The injection wells, and in the injection wells at the site can be used in 2 capacities. One is injection and one is production. So they're well couplets. And use typically, if you can use 2 to inject, but 1 to withdraw. So the first 2 wells are owned and were built by us, the district. The second 2 wells are owned, but were built by us, the district, as subcontractor to Cal-Am. And then the next 2 wells, which are ostensibly designed to balance the production of desal water, which will be located at Fitch Park, will be 100% owned by Cal-Am as well. But right now, they own 2, we own 2.
But the question was Sand City source wells.
Oh, Sand City, for their desal plant.
Desal,
yeah. Right,
excuse
right.
me.
Well,
That's
so currently that whole facility is owned by Sand City, built by Sand City, and leased to Cal-Am, and there's a fixed lease payment that was established through a decision by the Public Utilities Commission. To truly maximize that plant, they'll need some new wells. What was discovered during the drought is if you don't recharge the aquifer above, then the saline content gets higher, and so you can exceed, once you process it, you can exceed your discharge permit allowances for total dissolved solid and salts. And so you need to kind of maintain that brackish water characteristic. And so moving the wells, the source wells, to a more productive, less salty area would be an improvement for that.
Okay, because I wondered when we want to get that plant to a point where
yeah, and there's discussion right now about
looking at future desal.
Yeah, and on that plant with the new wells, there is discussion about who can fund it, who can own it. You know, should it be the city? Could it be the company? And that is, let's just call it in discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other directors' questions? Okay, we'll move on to number 6, update on major district projects. The note in the packet said that we would receive a copy of it tonight. It wasn't ready at the time of the packet.
Nope. Okay. So it's not ready.
Still not ready.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. All right, so then we'll move on to number 7.
Yeah, item 7 was included as an information item in your packet. It appears at approximately page 31. And this is just a reminder, there's been some discussion going back and forth, I think, between new directors, and just reminding all of us what we are capable of doing in procurement. Typically, it's competitive bidding for basic construction, but for professional services, sole sourcing can be used due to the unique nature of the services. And it's been traditional here at the district for many projects to use the sole sourcing for professional services based on prior knowledge of the project and the people providing the service or the unique nature of the services. So I know we've had that conversation at least twice. We'll probably have it again, but this should lay out for you what the basic procurement requirements for the district are.
Thank you. We'll move on to number 8, report, attorney's report. Excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to the board and to the members of the public. The board did meet in closed session at 5:30. There are 4 items on the agenda. 2 are matters of existing litigation. One is the proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission on the Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, and the other are the proceedings before the California Supreme Court as filed by the City of Marina and Marina Coast Water District. As to both those matters in litigation, a status report was provided to the board, but no reportable action was taken. The other 2 items on the agenda are pending and threatened litigation. The board was provided a status report, and the board did take action, motion by Director Burns, second by Director Adams, that the board authorized general counsel to retain 3 expert consulting firms in accord with action to be taken on item 14 on tonight's agenda, but also directed that details be held in confidence. The vote on that was 5 in favor. Directors Hoffman and Potter were absent, so the motion did pass 5-0. That concludes my report.
Okay. Thank you. Move on to number 9, oral reports on the activity of counties, cities, other agencies, committees, associations. Any directors have any reports? Okay, I do have a report. General Manager Stolt and I went up to Sacramento on February 6th. We attended a hearing of 3 subcommittees of the Assembly regarding what I guess is going to commonly be known as the quote-unquote water tax that has been put forth as a way to fund disadvantaged communities to get their water, to be able to operate and maintain water treatment systems. Following that hearing, we visited Assemblymember Rivas's staff, as well as Senator Caballero and Assemblymember Stone, to just kind of check in, say hello, provide a few updates on what the district was doing, and to talk to them, of course, about that bill coming forward about the water tax. So that's it. Okay. We'll move on to number 10, public hearing, considering authorizing a notice of intent to adopt a mitigated negative declaration and first readings for ordinance number 181, amending district rules and regulations to modify the extent of the Carmel River riparian corridor.
Madam Chair, members of the board, this item begins, I think it's on page 33 of your packet. It's a mouthful, as the chair stated earlier. Consider authorizing a notice of intent to adopt a mitigated negative declaration and the first reading for ordinance number 181, amending district rules and regulations to modify the extent of the Carmel River riparian corridor. So we'll talk about what is the riparian corridor. It was defined in 1983 with the adoption of Ordinance 10 as all areas within 25 lineal feet of an assessment line that was based on a 10-year flood line, which was developed by FEMA. Actually, Monterey County carried out the flood insurance study and defined what the 10-year flood limit was along the lower 15.4 miles of the river in what's called a detailed study. Cross-sections, computer simulation, hydrologic analysis, and hydraulics. And so that riparian corridor goes from the Pacific Ocean to the east end of Carmel Valley Village. For those of you familiar with the Valley Road, goes to about the Bloody Bucket at Klondike Creek. And there are 420 plus properties that are touched by this riparian corridor. And there were areas of golf courses and landscaping that was existing in 1983 that were exempted from the district's rules about activities in the riparian corridor. So to give you an idea, sort of a picture view of what's the riparian corridor, the green in the center of the picture shows what the riparian corridor is along the river. This is showing you from the Pacific Ocean up to Hacienda Carmel Retirement Community, including Rancho Cañada. So parts of the 100-year floodplain are certainly not in the riparian corridor. The 100-year floodplain extends much further than the current riparian corridor, in some places reaching all the way across the valley floor practically. And then you can see, for reference, where Highway 1 and Carmel Valley Road is in this view of the riparian corridor. And so at the east end, the current mapped riparian corridor is shown again in green, and you can see how as we go up the valley, the riparian corridor shrinks in size. Basically, the river is a lot narrower, it's a bit incised, and so the riparian corridor at the 10-year flood level is not nearly as extensive as it is closer to the ocean. So the program within the riparian corridor really started back because of requests in the early 1980s by the Carmel River Watch, that's CREW, and the Carmel River Sealet Association and other interested property owners who were really concerned about the degradation in the Carmel River, and asked the Water District to prepare a plan and carry out a program to enhance the river and restore the river. The program has been funded from initially assessments of the riverfront property owners between 1983 and 1993. That assessment sunset in 1993. It was part of the vote to create the Benefit Assessment District to sunset that assessment within 10 years. It's funded from CalAmp user fees, some property taxes, and the district has pursued grant funds in the past to do restoration projects. So part of the program includes regulations to protect the resources of the river. Those regulations go to restricting what activities property owners can carry out. You can't clear cut the vegetation on the river, you can't pour concrete on the river, you can't change the riverbed or riverbanks without getting an authorization from the Water Management District. And in addition, most of those kinds of activities would require other permits, including state and federal and local permits from Monterey County. So the proposal here is to extend this program, which did end at River Mile 15.4, up to the Ventana Wilderness boundary. And so this would include 40 parcels along the river. So as you recall, the current riparian corridor has about 420 parcels, 15.4 miles. As we get further up into the canyon-controlled area of the river, much larger parcels, fewer owners. So there would be about 40 parcels that would be included within that riparian corridor. We wouldn't change the activities. There would be the same kinds of activities that the district would carry out. The funding would continue from the existing mitigation program and property taxes and any grant funds that could be obtained. And of course, carrying out projects in that area would be funded similarly to projects that are funded in the lower 15.4 miles. Basically, as funds are available, projects could be funded. And so just in picture view, Google Earth showing Klondike Creek at the top. You can just see Carmel Valley Road along the upper right-hand side. It would extend along the main stem all the way up past Kashawa, the confluence with Kashawa Creek, and then the next slide shows that it would extend from Los Padres up to Los Padres Dam and through the reservoir and then up to the Ventana Wilderness boundary. And so staff is recommending that you direct us to prepare a notice of intent to adopt a mitigated negative declaration for Ordinance 181. We do have a mitigated negative declaration, a draft of it in the packet. This is required in order to take a CEQA action to adopt this ordinance. And this mitigated negative declaration does rely on the previously prepared environmental impact report for the Carmel River Management Program. So that report considered the impacts of these activities on the Carmel River and the activities that would occur by extending the riparian corridor would be very similar. The impacts from those activities would be very similar to what was already considered in the EIR. Recommendation 2 is to set a public hearing to hear about comments on the mitigated negative declaration and for comments on the second reading of Ordinance 181, after which, if the board approves, the ordinance would go into effect, I believe, within 30 days. And then, let's see, we have a couple more recommendations. No, that's...
Larry,
yes.
so that includes approving the ordinance on first reading tonight, though, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to point out that it was not included in the staff note that we would approve it tonight and then go and set a date for this second reading.
That should have been made clear, and it wasn't, and that should be part of the action tonight.
Okay, thanks. Okay, directors, do we have any questions of staff?
I have a question, please. When the San Clemente Dam was removed, there was some residual liabilities, I think, retained by Cal-Am during that process. I don't know. I'm just trying to remember years ago. Is there any element of that related to the mitigation requirements that you're proposing here?
Well, Cal-Am retains the property at this point, so they are responsible for that property. Extending the riparian corridor through San Clemente and up to Los Padres Dam would mean that if Cal-Am wants to alter the bed and banks of the river through that area, they would need to get a permit from the Water Management District.
It's still contained within this project. And I mean, the responsibility of riverbank restoration or control or maintenance from the district side still applies to Cal-Am in its project.
Well, the district has, in the past, when we've seen a project that needs, or an area that needs restoration or should have some kind of work, we've worked with property owners. Sometimes property owners have proposed work, and we've worked with them to provide technical assistance. And sometimes the district has said, well, the reason that this area has degraded is because of water extraction practices. Now, through this reach upstream, we can't really make a connection between water extraction practices. We could make a connection between having facilities in the river at one point that were producing water, but I can't see that the district would necessarily be responsible for any project work. It would be an option for the district to participate in a project or a program through the Cal-Am properties, but it would not be an obligation.
And this doesn't change any of the company's obligations as a result of the San Clemente Dam reroute. Although I think the time is starting to pass where Granite's obligation probably has expired. I don't know, it's getting close. But, you know, the obligations that they have as a result of that project remain theirs.
That was my question.
Yeah, I'd like to be clear. This does not obligate the Water Management District to do restoration projects upstream of the existing riparian corridor. It would allow the district to, if it chooses to do a project through this program.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. So above that, do we have property owners?
You mean above the
Where we're going? We're going into a new area now, right?
So the new area has 40 parcels. But beyond where the new riparian corridor would stop, that's the Ventana Wilderness boundary. That's owned by the U.S. government.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody paying their fair share of it. You know, I thought I heard you say those below, we still have money and we can still do things. But up above, we can't do anything unless they're paying, correct? Or
Well, so the entire river corridor is connected. regardless of where you establish a boundary for a zone, the river physically is connected. And so what happens upstream can potentially affect what goes on downstream. So there's a good reason to have the district involved in regulating activities further upstream and in potentially doing enhancement projects that could help downstream owners.
But the properties that are getting added in won't have any specific obligation to contribute, just as the properties down below after 1993 no longer had a specific obligation. So it's basically in the cost center for mitigation, the district's mitigation cost center that's funded through the user fee generally from any CalAm main customer.
Okay, thank you. Because I just wanted to make sure that, you know, you added on additional. People want to know who's paying for that. And I want to make sure we cleared that up tonight. Thank you. Good job, Larry.
Okay, any other directors have questions? Seeing none, I will open it up to public comment.
My question is just about.
Please state your name.
Yeah, Michael Bear, Carmel Valley. They're very close to the river, right? I don't know if I'm in it or not. I'm going to be in the new one, but I'm right near that boundary. My question is related to these activities you're talking about, riparian enhancement. Is this, can you talk about? Is it mostly for steelhead and other critters that live along the river, or to what extent would flood control be part of the activities? Part of the, is flood control going to be a benefit of doing these activities upstream? Thank you.
I can take that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Let's close public comment first.
Anybody else wishing to speak on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close public comment. Mr. Stolt.
Yeah, so the district has no flood control obligations on the river. Occasionally, there's actions that we take that are habitat related that may have a flood control impact, but
erosion control.
But it's erosion control and habitat protection, primarily to mitigate for the benefit of the critters, if you will, but also to maintain stream banks. In times of stress, the roots give out and you lose vegetation, and then the banks give out, and it can be an exacerbating situation. So we're doing a lot of erosion control, evidence of which you can see right off the Rancho San Carlos Road that we did just last autumn, which has apparently held up throughout these rains. And so that's primarily the type of activity. So if we began to identify those kind of needs further upstream, that's what we would be doing.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion by the board?
I move approval of first reading of ordinance 181 plus the approval of the delegated negative declaration. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, but this is, yes, thank you, Mr. Laredo. This is a roll call vote.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, it wasn't approval of the mitigated negative deck. It was approval of directing staff to prepare a notice of intent on the mitigated negative deck.
Okay, so corrected. So then we do have a motion then to follow staff recommendation to direct staff to prepare the notice of intent to adopt the mitigated negative declaration, approve the first reading of the ordinance, and set a date for the second reading.
Yes.
Got it. And we have a second by, okay, Director Byrne. So motion by Director Riley, second by Director Byrne. A roll call vote. Arlene?
Director Edwards.
Approval?
Director Riley.
Yes.
Director Adams.
Yes.
Director Byrne.
Yes.
And Director Evans.
Yes.
Unanimous approval.
Thank you. We move on to number 11. This is a discussion item to discuss criteria for the development of a feasibility study on public ownership of the Monterey Peninsula water system and consider scheduling a future meeting date for action. So this is a discussion item only.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the staff note kind of highlights where we've gotten to. Both items on 11 and 12 were kind of signaled at the last board meeting as something you wanted to address here and possibly at a third meeting. The outcome of the listening sessions was, as we learned, that the community is very divided over what is feasible. But our discovery to date is we need to somewhat define feasible early in the process. Doesn't have to be day one. But if you remember the process, it's value the system, convert that value or price into a municipal debt, put that municipal debt in place of the financing structure of the company, and see what the cost of operations looks like. And we're going to direct the consultants to build a cost of service model. And if we say, hey, don't worry about it, no savings till the 30th year, that means one thing to how many scenarios they have to do. Or if we say you need to show savings early on, they'll be into the data, they'll be into the construction of the model, and they will be able to signal early on, hey, we got a problem. We're not going to run 12 scenarios or 20 scenarios based on this criteria because it's just not going to work. Or based on this criteria, here are the things that do work. So at some point, we have to give them marching orders as to what it is we want them to look for. And I think that we're beginning to receive some signals. There were very strong signals by the public who have spoken about, we were told savings were going to happen, excuse me, that rates would go down, that there would be cost savings. We heard from many citizens who said, I don't care, we just want the company out. As we've talked about that with, for example, our eminent domain counsel, I think we gave you a little nugget in here where they've said, you know, to get through the bench trial, you're going to need to show savings relatively early in the process. The consultant who, we didn't ask the proposer to tell us anything about feasibility, but they kind of locked on to what the public process was going forward. So unsolicited by us, one of the consultants gave a little measure of what could be considered feasible and so forth. And what they put forth was kind of right in the wheelhouse of what we'd already been talking about. But at some point, and relatively upfront, I do believe that we need to start looking at what measures we're going to instruct the consultants to look at. And what's kind of percolating out through this is, if you have an interest in doing this well, and an interest in coming up with a solution that meets the voters' tests of feasible, then you probably want something that could withstand a bench trial and move on to acquisition. And so we might start to use, you know, what would pass muster at a bench trial as our measure. And I think, you know, we've talked about it already, just the desire to have the company leave town, that's just a desire, but a judge will basically say, well, where's the benefit? Where's the public benefit of that if all the ratepayers aren't going to get savings? So our eminent domain attorneys are saying, to make it through the bench trial phase, you're going to need to demonstrate savings relatively early. And so I think we're beginning to kind of suss out things that work. The other is we heard a lot about, I want to know where I'm paying for this. I don't want a tax increase over here and a rate decrease over here, and then have to figure out how to add the two together. So I think we're beginning to say, well, we need a financing structure that encapsulates both and gives you a clear price signal. But that's just kind of where the staff note takes you as to where we are currently. I think it's up to you to discuss more about what you want to do and when you want to make a decision. But I'll reiterate, I do believe we need to come down to some narrow focus to say, all right, here's what we're looking for to pass the test, if you will.
So what are the other criteria you think meet the bench trial?
Well, I don't want to steer you, but my personal opinion is exactly what is said here. Actual savings in the cost of service within a very short period, if not immediately. I've tried to oversimplify the bench trial process, but in effect, if the economics show it to be feasible and you move to that next step, and yes, Mayor, we will at that time remind everybody what the risks are and how much they cost, which we don't know now. But if you do decide to move forward, then really you're basically looking at, and there's tens of dozens of things that you would, findings in the public benefit that you would come forward with. But to just characterize them simply, it's the cost of service, the quality of service, and the governance. And I think we're comfortable in saying that a public model is better in governance based on what's in the public interest. Delivery of service, we currently don't deliver. We've got guys who do pumps and pipes and fleet management and billing and things at a very small scale. But scaling up, it'd be very easy for the company to say, you know, these guys don't know what they're doing. And so we'd have to make a case for that. And then you're down to cost. And the advice we're getting is, if you can't demonstrate that it's in the ratepayer's interest relatively quickly, not some future ratepayer, then a judge is in effect going to say, well, I don't see the public necessity, the public benefit to proceed today on this process. That's kind of where I'm at. And so I would say that you need a standard of demonstrated savings in the overall. I mean, we've had a discussion about rates versus cost of service. We can deal with that issue at a different point in time.
Do any other directors have questions?
I do, but I would.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm questions of Mr. Stolt on his staff note. No. Okay.
So tonight, if I told you we don't want to see this on our property taxes, would that be considered?
Yep. And that, so the two areas we've talked about here are cost and financing. And I think the structure I'd like to see, which is the way most public entities are done, is your rates and charges include everything. It's, you know, there's still some systems out there that have a property tax base that comes into their total revenues, but your rate setting in that instance is, well, you figure out everything that you get from either permit fees and property taxes, you kind of take that off of your O&M expense, and then you say, okay, this is the remainder of my O&M and my debt. All the rest of it's got to come out of rates. And so there's a few systems out there, but the enterprise fund systems, typically any fixed cost, any improvement that you make, any bonded indebtedness, it's in your rates and charges. And you have rate covenants. You basically covenant that all your revenues together minus your O&M expense is going to equal 1 point something of your debt expense. And that point something then is a little bit of buffer. It's called coverage. And you take that, and that makes sure that if your rates or if your payments fluctuate, you still have some room to pay your debt. But your debt's in part of the enterprise. And that's the typical public model, is put it all in your rates and charges.
So looking at my CalAm bill, I got all these fees on there. Will this simplify that? Some people are calling, we don't need that fee, or this fee should be cut. Or,
Yeah,
you know, he's not here tonight, but I'm missing.
It wouldn't be nirvana. Things that won't go away that you'd continue to honor would be the individual cities' utility user taxes and franchise fees. Things that would go away would be the surcharge for everyone's favorite state regulator, the Public Utilities Commission. The district user fee would disappear. So there'd be some things that stay and some things that go.
And we couldn't get a list of those before it's done. We got to do the. People will want to know what's going to be on there and what's not going to be on there. So, and
yeah, well, and
going through the process, would they be able to know?
Well, and that's the goal is, you know, right, and we're going to have, I think, under the next item, talk a little bit about transparency and appropriate timing for what you can say, when you can say it. Right now, there's nothing to say. There's no study that's been done. The available data hasn't been fully identified. And so we've got really nothing to talk about. But as we get further through this process and we say, here's what it's going to look like, or we now have a white paper from our investment banker that says, here's how you can structure it, here's how you can provide the protections you need to raise the money within 30 days of an eminent domain jury case, but also handle the 60-day appeal period over the decision. Here's how it would look under the enterprise. Here's what your coverage needs to be. This is what it does to the cost of service model. When we get those kinds of things, then we will try to tell the public as much about that as we can. But we're not even in a position to tell them which surcharges are going to come off their bill yet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things are public benefit? I mean, obviously cost is one of the principal issues, but what what are they going to consider as a public benefit?
Right. So if it gets to that point, so if we've deemed it to be feasible based on cost of service, all sorts of things will get in there. Transparency in rate making. You get to look at a rate study. Under investor-owned utility ownership, you don't get to see a comprehensive planning study. It's a trade secret. So you don't even know for sure what the upcoming capital is for the next 10 years. In the public sector, you'd see a capital improvement plan and you'd be going, oh, look, they're going to be spending $3 million a year for the next 10 years. So you can make the case that there's transparency, that maybe you don't get the local control, that you don't have to drive 2.5 hours to attend a hearing. There will be those kind of things. And in the same case, there will be the utility would be saying, well, they've never provided retail service. They don't have a customer service call center. These are expenses that have to be looked at. So it's not in the public benefit to have some new guys running this system. We know how to run it. And as I said, there will be you'll be splitting hairs on all sorts of things about past practice and future practice. But basically, if a judge says, no, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, we'll just leave it in the hands of the current provider. And that's, in a little bit of simplification, that's what City of Claremont did. And the standard in California is a little bit different. For water, gas, and electric utilities, there's a more severe standard for eminent domain public necessity than other things.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to public comment.
Doug Wilhelm, Carmel. I just had a couple of suggestions I'd like to make, which I think might simplify consideration for feasibility. The first, potentially the most complicated thing is the valuation of a desal plant when we don't know at this point what the position of this desal plant is going to be at that point. So I would suggest that while the feasibility study is being made, they make a baseline assumption. Doesn't make any difference, but just say a baseline assumption of no desal plant, and then they make another assumption of a desal plant ready to go and without any question marks around its ability to produce and to meet its standards. The real world may be a plant that's 80% complete or something, but we can't begin to come up with a whole bunch of different suggestions. So that way you just have two to look at. The other thing is there are going to be certain costs that are being incurred. Most obvious right now is the cost for the experts. And I would suggest that we think, as we develop the cost, a startup date, which is X, and what the costs are going to be before the startup date, and then the going cost. And for the startup, the cost before the startup date then can be, obviously they are cost for us water payers, but they may be spread out over 1 year or maybe over 5 years or something in between, depending on how to provide the smoothest kinds of rates for the customer out ahead. So those were the two comments that I had. Thank you.
Michael Baer, Carmel Valley. I'd like to push back a little bit on this idea of Colton saying that, the savings early in the process is important, and yeah, it's important to know, when the savings are going to come. But my understanding of the process is that first it's is it in the public interest phase of the bench trial, if you will, and the second phase is what is the value and is it affordable, or is it feasible in the public interest to acquire it based on what an actual number is going to be. And so you know, I think it's up to this board to make a decision about what is the benefit of not having the PUC. And I would just like to go back to the fact that we don't, you know, we're talking about expansion, and we don't have a, you know, they shut it down because there's no water purchase agreement or way for them to really attain one. The PUC left it up to Cal-Am to say, well, you look into the feasibility, and if you think it might work, give it to them. If this board was deciding whether to do expansion or not, it would be a whole different animal. And that is a huge value to the community, to have that local control. And if a judge needs to be able to understand that part of the equation, not just the cost part. And then, you know, I mentioned this in one of the hearing studies. What if you had a 50-year bond? I mean, we're talking about savings. Well, what if we just made it over more generations to pay for? You know, we could manipulate the numbers to get that savings early if we extended out the bond. And then the final thing, and a number of people have said this over the hearings and at the meeting last month, you know, let's look at what, you know, 20 years from now, what we'd be paying Cal-Am. I mean, if you look back at the history of the last 10, 15, 20 years of Cal-Am and how the rates have gone up, and since they don't allow us to, you know, it's proprietary to look in, you know, to see what's going on with their numbers, the only numbers we really have is like projecting what happened over the last 15 years into the next 15 years. And, you know, it's not like what we're paying now. And then finally, still have some time here, I like what Doug had to say about, you know, what is it with the desal plant? What is it without the desal plant? And I'd just like to say, with the desal plant, don't we save about $100 million in financing charges? I mean, if we're going to have a desal plant, isn't it in the public interest to get that money at 2 and 4% instead of 7%? I mean, these are ways to look at savings. And so I just want to push back on that idea that, you know, yes, it's important to have those early savings, but that should not be a deal breaker if it doesn't look like it's coming out that way. There's lots of other really important things.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Rick Hoyer. I'm here as president of the Monterey Peninsula Taxpayers Association. I will speak specifically to feasibility, taxing, the methodology of raising funds, and other aspects. I think the election made very clear, and we even heard tonight, we have the most expensive water in the United States. If there's not savings day one, we will continue to have the most expensive water day one. So either there's savings or there's not. It's not 30 years from now. 30 years from now, no one in this room can say with certainty what the rates might have been with Cal-Am or even what the rates might be that you all would be charging for water. It's exactly that. It's speculation. Either we're saving money, which is what the entire campaign was sold on, or we're not. So feasible needs to be day one. How much savings, whatever, that's a whole different question when it comes to level of feasibility. And it's got to include all costs, administrative costs, call center costs, billing costs, things that you don't currently do and you have to add or scale up need to be included in that. And so that's why actually doing it as the enterprise fund model is very clear, much more transparent to the public, and the people who are using the water are paying for the cost of providing it. You start putting it on the tax roll, and you have people who pay property taxes who actually don't pay for water. So you're having people pay for the entire thing that aren't using the water from the district. And you have other people who don't pay property taxes who only pay for water. To pay for what you're using is the way it should be. The other thing, actually Mr. Edwards brought it up tonight. My question was, what's happening to all the fees that are on your bill? And it's nice to see that actually from Mr. Stolt tonight that the user fee is going to go away. You are actually going to give up revenue as part of this process, because the user fee is revenue on your bill that goes to the water management district. It's been used in some areas as part of the justification of how it would be cheaper to do it yourselves because that fee would no longer be on it. So my question was going to be, is that going to stay or not? And we heard tonight it's not. I think as transparent a process as possible, and everything has to be included, and that's fully funded pensions. It's not like Sacramento where we're, You've got unfunded pension liabilities, and if everything is in a enterprise fund, then the employees that are part of that fund, all their benefits are in that as well, so it becomes a very clean way of looking at it. And to me, if there isn't savings day one, it isn't in the public benefit, because I'm not going to be around, at least I don't think so, 30 years from now. So my kids may or may not, but no one in here has a crystal ball to predict what that cost would be and what the savings would be 30 years from now. Thank you.
Dan Turner, Monterey. I had a crazy uncle who was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He didn't dispute the conviction, but he thought the sentence was excessive, so he appealed. And the judge offered to reduce the sentence to 5 years, but my uncle rejected it. He said if he had to spend even 1 day in jail, he'd rather serve the whole life sentence. Like I said, he was crazy. But now we have the spectacle of Cal-Am and his supporters claiming that if we don't save money from day one, we should reconcile ourselves to spending the rest of our lives with Cal-Am. I don't know if they're crazy, but they certainly seem to be beyond embarrassment. I mean, I would be too embarrassed to support and promote such an idiotic idea. But not Cal-Am supporters, no siree Bob. It's day one or bust for them. On the bright side, I suppose it bodes well for those of us who want to move toward public water that this is the best strategy. And incidentally, I have the word strategy in quotation marks because it's not really accurate to call such a harebrained idea strategy. But I guess that if this is the best that Cal-Am and its supporters can come up with, we may be closer than we think to achieving public water. It'll be interesting to see if they can get more than 2 votes for this idea. However, if they can garner 4 votes in favor of making savings by day one a criterion of feasibility, I'd advise we postpone the study until after the 2020 elections, because it would be pointless to proceed with a board that would have 4 votes for an idea like that. And I'm sorry I dissed Director Dave. I'm sure he has stores of integrity that he hasn't even used yet.
Director Evans, members of the board, I'm Jeff Davey. I am newly taking over as the Coalition of Businesses chair. I'm a co-chair with Mr. John Tilley. I'm replacing John Narigi, who has been doing it for about the last 8 years. So it takes 2 people to replace John, so we'll do our best. Thank you, John, for all your efforts. The Coalition of Businesses did submit a letter, which Mr. Stoltz responded to. Thank you for that response. And we appreciate that. The whole interest is in the transparency. That's one of our biggest concerns, making sure we know what's going on, and we know it in advance, and we see what's down the pike. As you know, I'm in the real estate business. In the real estate business, there's lots of things that go on. Disclosure is huge. And I think about this whole process. The key of this process is going to be disclosure. As we proceed down this road analysis of the feasibility of public ownership of Monterey Peninsula water systems, the district is going to spend a lot of money on the process. And there's going to be some things that could really use some further disclosure. And certainly, we hope the board's plan is to make this information as available to the public as possible. For example, what is the scope of this feasibility, the work plan? What is the definition of it? Where's the money coming from? And item 14 coming to the agenda, who are these consultants that we're going to be hiring? These are all concerns that we want to make sure we know in advance who they are and what their involvement's going to be. I want to ensure that the whole process is done so we know it, and it's transparent. It's been our mantra since the beginning. And finally, one of the new taglines of the coalition is going to be this, so I'll finish by saying, don't forget the CDO. Thank you.
Hello, hello, my name is Marlene Fisher, and I am a Carmel Valley resident. And I would just like to say that I think when we talk about feasibility and the cost, that we need to talk about the bottom line on the bill, not just the rate.
If all we talk about is the rates, that can be manipulated to some degree. Let's not do that. Let's have the bottom line of the bill. And then when that comparison is being made as to whether or not this is a benefit to us, we should be looking at not what the cost to us at this time is, but the cost at the time that we would be actually able to carry this whole thing out, not the current cost. Thank you.
Anna Thompson, Carmel. I'm just really puzzled about one thing. The benefits and the costs have to be less at the beginning. When I purchased my home, my first home in whatever I was living in, when I look to purchase something, I don't look for the benefit immediately. I might even pay more in my mortgage than I would be paying for my rental. And still, I will benefit from purchasing that house because 30 years later will be mine. The rental would also go up. You know, there is an inflation there. So that is very important that we look at it in the future, comparing to what the rates will be or the costs will be with the private companies, like if we were renting it. You know, it will not be, they will be going up and up and up. Don't you care about the future of this community? It's just the current one. And all the costs that are we paying now, that we're paying it. They don't come up from the profits that the CalAm is making. We're paying all the costs, even for things that do not, they fail, we're paying it too. And the profits are always there for the company. So they don't have anything to lose. So they're always going to charge more and more. And like, for example, the decision that they're making to go with the desal plant, which has a lot of problems with it, they don't care. And they don't care if there is going to be problems with it later on. We're going to pay the fees for it. But we have a viable alternative, which is much less expensive. Don't we have to put some kind of value on the benefit that we gain by being a public water? That is an extreme valuable thing to have. So don't we need to capture that and put it in the feasibility study? You know, that's a very important point to make. And I will not be satisfied to say the rates have to be less the day one. It would take 30 years maybe. But just imagine if we own it, if the public owned it 30 years ago. We would not have the highest rates in the nation, and we would have a say on what's going to be the water policies that we're going to use. So you want to make sure that that portion is in the feasibility study, and that benefit, you attach a value to it, and you have to compare what would it be the rates with CalAm if we continue to have CalAm. You know, you have to compare both, not just the day one. You have to put a time in there. Maybe 30 years would be a good thing, 20 years, but no less than 20 years. Okay, thank you very much. And you have to do a comparison. You cannot just say, okay, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Paul Bruno. I'm a resident of Monterey. First, I'd like to apologize for calling out Mr. Turner earlier. I should have just let him speak and let it go. I'd like to say that we talk about a lot about honesty and transparency, and it's great to see it right here in our staff report. Kudos to General Manager Stolt. Reading this sentence, I'm going to read it again. The district's eminent domain attorneys have indicated that in order to prove public necessity at a bench trial, cost savings will have to be shown early on and must continue thereafter. That bench trial is really important. It's a hurdle, and you have to get over it. And so seeing this right now in here, I think is a testament to a little bit of honesty and transparency. For some background, I'm not, most of you think of me as a contractor, I believe, but I actually started out, before joining the family business, I was a CPA with Deloitte Haskins and Sells. We were an international accounting firm. So I'm technically a numbers guy. Measure J was sold on the numbers. It was sold on savings. I was very involved in that campaign, and I can tell you it was savings, and savings. And I want to make sure that we think about, when we talk about determining savings and early on savings, that the analysis is comprehensive. And it brings me back to I attended a Public Water Now session up at the church, and they had their bond person there. And the bond person was very clear that in order to bond this thing, you're going to need to have a secure water supply. And in order to have a secure water supply, you really need a desal plant. So to analyze this without having a desal plant in it, I think is a fatal flaw. If you want to move forward to acquisition, you must include the cost of desal in your model. Thank you for your efforts.
Melody Chrislock, Managing Director of Public Water Now. To respond to what Paul just said, we didn't get to ask Paul Sciutto some questions afterwards I thought we were going to get to, but one of the things that I was going to ask was, with the extension, do we really need the desal plant? I know what his answer is. We don't. But he's not here to answer that. Mostly what I want to address is I don't want any other members of Public Water Now to start seeing this as a conspiracy. I understand what Dave Stolt is saying, that while Public Water Now with Measure J said, yes, we're going to have savings, we want savings, we'll find savings, we didn't really care whether we had them now or then. We knew that eventually we would have savings from public ownership. But now we're being presented with what an eminent domain attorney is saying, that we need to prove savings early on in order to get public ownership. So I want everybody to be clear about that. This is not a conspiracy on Cal-Am's part or anybody else's part. This is the truth that we're being confronted with by an eminent domain process. So I want to make sure that people don't move forward arguing that somehow this has been hijacked by saying that we need to show savings early on. We probably will be able to show savings early on. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. John Tilley, Pacific Grove. Just want to point out that David did a great job. Really appreciate that, the mention of the realities that exist of the bench trial, because that's really, everybody has their feeling of what they want this process to do one way or another, possibly, or be open-minded in some ways. But the reality is, at the end of the day, it's going to be a bench trial that determines the outcome, in my opinion. There's two things that are going on. One is a water supply question, and the other one is a water ownership question. And just to separate the two, the idea that the water supply project has to include the desal plant, so we do have a sustainable water supply here in the area. So I would just encourage, if I could, for the desal plant to fully be included in the feasibility study. The cease and desist order at the same time is just a sword hanging over our heads, and the idea that we can delay projects to further consider expansions or so forth. If we can, that's great, but I think we have to very much respect the cease and desist order and the timing of projects so that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot and have to respect the demands of the cease and desist order, but not have a water supply in place to answer the needs of the cease and desist order. Thank you very much.
Hi, Susan Schiavone. I'm in Seaside. And I just want to say thank you for being clear about the eminent domain needs that we have to address. But I do want to say that Monterey 1 expansion could be a much cheaper alternative than the desal plant. The desal plant is now going to be caught up in litigation. It's fighting for permits that aren't being granted, and it will take a long time to do that. So if we could push forward the Monterey 1 expansion with approving for the EIR, the supplemental EIR they need, and have them online as a backup, that is a much cheaper source of water, and it would be a parallel course to evaluate for feasibility, and I'd like to see that one promoted. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Peter Mountier, PG Chamber. Tonight's agenda report stated that it was the opinion of the district's eminent domain attorney that in order to prove public necessity at a bench trial, cost savings would have to be shown very early on and must continue thereafter. To me, that implies that those are separate conditions that must both be confirmed in the feasibility study before the district considers moving forward. Based on that, it seems like some criteria have already been identified, and we feel that there should be more transparency on this and any other criteria used to define feasibility. Additionally, the district should establish what its course of action would be if the feasibility study shows that only one of those apparent criteria can be clearly met. For example, if savings can be shown early, but it's unclear if those savings would continue, would the district proceed with potentially expensive litigation and buyout process anyway? And I can't help but also wonder what very early on could mean. That savings would be shown within 3 to 6 months, within a year. That language could have multiple meanings, and it's my opinion that that should be clearly established to the public, especially given the expense incurred in undertaking the study. And finally, the district's consultants should include in the definition of feasibility lower water rates in perpetuity. Both because that's what the attorney seems to be advising and because that's the bill of goods that voters were sold on Measure J. The agenda states savings would have to be shown very early on, and that must mean cost savings in the rates. The idea of financing a buyout with a separate tax doesn't sound like an overall savings to ratepayers, and furthermore, it would require an election and more expenses around that, so that language on what savings is should be examined carefully. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison, Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, the Chamber of Commerce is always concerned that there's opportunity for economic growth and job creation, that businesses can grow without excessive taxes, and our organization is looking at this carefully. There is some concern. You're going to have an item later about hiring the various consultants with no mention about who these consultants are. And with that lack of transparency and openness, people are going to say, who are these people and what are they deciding and what are their criteria? So I encourage you as you go forward to make sure that the public is fully aware of who you're hiring, who the experts are going to be looking at it, and make sure that people don't think this is all a rigged process to have a public takeover. I know a lot of our leaders and members are saying, you know what, we're a little skeptical about the promise of public takeover because sometimes government does not result in a more efficient use of resources. So please try to be open and transparent about what you're doing so that the public and the businesses in this area are assured that they're being considered during this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments regarding feasibility criteria?
And discussion.
Thank
Judith Lehman, Carmel Valley resident. Just a couple of things. Previous speaker had said that he felt that it was important that everybody pay an equal rate, which I think is something that we should include in our feasibility, because I believe at this point there's still a kind of a side deal with businesses and golf courses and places that are using just a flat fee no matter how much water they use. So if you're going to be doing cost-saving analysis and fee analysis, to include that. Also, I don't know how you can put a value on it, but it certainly is going to be a public benefit to see people that are hired to cover the additional jobs and have that money stay in our economy here, and also to be able to see the tax savings and things that will be taken care of with public ownership. So it's not going to be a pretty sight, I'm sure, but something that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lehman. Seeing no other speakers, going to close public comment. Directors, open for discussion. Oh.
Price that you pay and where it slips into the cost of service, you're going to get fairly objective results as long as you include all the transaction costs, the transition costs, and the severance costs. We can certainly let the numbers fall where they may, and you can look and see what happens in years 1 through 5, 10 through 15, the life cycle, and you'll have things to look at and say, well, you know, at the price that we think we have to pay, there are savings, but they happen here. Tell us, team, what are our chances? So you'll have that you'll have that opportunity if you just want to let the numbers fall where they lie. Number one. Number two, we are scheduling, but have not yet had all the consultants in the room. So there's one data point from one conversation between David Laredo, myself, and our eminent domain attorneys. But this is the type of thing that we can talk among ourselves and get additional feedback before your next board meeting as well, as to, well, what's the group, what's the team say? So I just want to hold that out that, you know, there's more data that can be gathered.
Okay. Thank you. Director Byrne?
So this is discussion, essentially. It's not a decision, but I think, in my opinion, cost is obviously one of the issues that's going to be really important. I think absolutely the desal plant has to be included. You know, years ago we had a dam that was turned down. This is our opportunity to have a long-term water supply, which this peninsula absolutely has to have. We have spent millions and millions of dollars trying to get to a long-term supply, and the recycled water project is not a guarantee in terms of source water, and it, Paul Shudo also said it would not equal the desal plant. So those are the two items that I think are important.
Okay. This is a discussion among the directors, so we can talk. Okay, Director Riley.
Having been involved in Measure J, I remember from a lot of the research that was done, they said there was a potential for savings right away, but there were absolutely guaranteed to be, we assume guaranteed to be a savings at the end of the acquisition. So that's like a 30-year period. So the campaign did not promise anything except let's do a feasibility study. There were a lot of arguments made about why there was, why it was attractive to do the study, why it was attractive to go down that road. But the promise was, let's get the facts. And so my concern today, and with this point is, we have so few facts in front of us, and we're at the very front end of getting it, and yet we're trying to establish a goal line that is not based on anything but rhetoric. Your rhetoric, my rhetoric. It's all rhetoric. And until we get some facts into the game somehow, into the process, it seems to me it's really premature. So I'm for let the consultants have it, put a benchmark in. I think somebody said, one of the comments, the public speaker said, the bookends could be savings right away and savings in 30 years. Well, that covers everything. And maybe that doesn't help the consultants at all. And maybe it doesn't help you either at all. But I like Alvin's suggestion that don't use property tax. I like that as a restriction. And so if that's one way to kind of get some control over things, I'd like to do that. I would like to go back to the wording of the consultant that said, as early as possible, very early on. That's not precise. What's early to me? What's early to somebody else? 10 years? 15 years? 2 weeks? You know, the first rate case, the first rate bill that you send out? There is so much unknown. The transition, the implementation of a changeover, the final value of what Cal-Am's going to be worth. All of those things are not even known yet. It may not be known for several years. But yet the people who have very definite ideas are so convinced of what? Of what? There are no facts to base it on, except a wish or a desire, or maybe a certain hurdle that's as high as you can make the hurdle. I don't mind a high hurdle, but I think if we put a number on it, I think we're asking for trouble from the consultants. We ought to, I don't mind a loosely defined kind of range, but I think if we go with real precise numbers, I think we're in trouble, and I'll sure vote against a real precise number.
Well, I'd like to follow that up, because I think what is being asked for is a general idea so that the consultants know what direction to head. Do they want to head for 30 years, or do they want to head for short term? And I think cost is an issue. So whether it's long term or short term, the consultants have to have at least some kind of direction what should be included. And it doesn't have to be a specific number, it's just a direction. That's my
just more on it. I'm all in favor of giving direction, but we too are basing it on, wishful thinking of some kind. It's really not based on any facts. Unless you can help me understand my dilemma here.
No, I think your dilemma is the same dilemma we're all having, which is A, true, we have no facts. But B, you don't necessarily have to define it. You can do what I said, which is go put a value on the system, convert that to debt, slip it into the operating model of how it works, and there is a comparison. You put it in, what's it look like under private ownership? What will it look like with this new debt under public ownership? And you compare the two. And you can do that for the various scenarios that we've talked about looking at, and you can see what the results are. And you can, and if they all come out with no savings for 30 years, then you reassess how likely you're going to be able to move forward through the bench phase based on the expert advice you have from the attorneys in the room. You can most certainly do that, because the numbers will present themselves with outcomes. And you can look at those numbers and you say, well, this is going to be a lot tougher sell than we thought, or, hey, look at that, there's savings in the first year. So what were we so worried about? But until you actually do that, you don't know what you have.
Just one other comment from the public generally about including the desal. I think the desal is such an unknown cost right now that it's hard to even estimate when that might happen or how that might happen, or if it's even desired. Don't forget, Cal-Am has several failed projects in their history after having gotten the CPC in, and the project didn't get off the ground, and we were still sent the bill. So the fact that Cal-Am has a CPC in is no guarantee of success, because we've seen it once before, and that was not a litigated process. They fell apart, but now there's litigation on this. My only concern is that trying to add something to the pot that's a risky if already, and trying to manage analysis around that, it seems like we're managing shadows, not substance. And I don't know where to go. I think we need to get some more input from the consultants, I think, sometime, and see what we learn from that. I'm a little more concerned about the structure of how we proceed rather than getting clarification on just this one issue. And that's probably maybe a next subject.
Okay. Anybody on this side of the table? Go ahead.
General Manager, desal. Outside the district, within the district. Is there a way to get a project? That's something that we should find out too. Is it a way to make sure that we can get a project inside the district instead of outside the district that's causing a lot of problems? We want it, but somebody don't want to give it to us. So I think we need to really look at that. And I still go with, I don't want to see property taxes. I don't want to see a mellow roofs or whatever other, no taxes added on it if it's not going to come from that water bill from that company. And find out how much that overhead is that we paying these presidents, vice presidents, and those down that's not here that we're paying them. That should be added in there, and we should know what that cost is. I think we're paying a lot of money that we could be saving by not paying that. That profit is right there, profit for water. That's what we've been stuck with. And that's what that company is, a private company that's making money on water. And we got to look at it better than what we're looking at. And some people out there think that, hey, well, that's their business, but it's coming out of us. Desal, I look at it like this. I'm going to pay for it if it's in Marina, and then I'm going to pay for it if it's not in Marina. But it's part of the project. But we need to look at it. But if we can't get it built in this district, I think we really should be looking at that desal project. But I don't look at it as making profit off of it. Cal-Am making profit off of it. It should be public. It should be public where all agencies can use the money that goes back into it so we can know what the real cost is. So, at some point we're going to need a desal point, and I think that should be brought up, at some point. Pure water Monterey expansion can go so far, but sooner or later, 10, 15 years down the road, we're going to need that desal, and I like to see it within the district than outside, publicly owned.
Just a couple of thoughts kind of following up actually with what you were saying. I think we have to have desal at some point. There's no question about it. We live in an arid area, and we've got to have it. The question is how and when and how we're going to pay for it. So as I think about it, I look at the method of financing, and I hear what you're saying, that nobody wants taxes. That's not the way it's going to go. But I don't feel like I'm qualified to make that recommendation. That's why we have the consultants that we're looking at to see what they have to come up with. But I agree that we need to have a couple of specific points, lines in the sand, so to speak, and, taxes may well be one of them. But I would not want to completely constrain their report by putting something down that, that we might have to change. So, I'm more inclined to be flexible until we see what they bring back. But, like instead of the 10 commandments, it's like the 10 suggestions. I think we ought to be thinking about it that way and, give them just some thoughts of what some general ideas of what it is that we think. And I think, no new taxes might be certainly one of the things that we talk about.
I just thinking out loud as I talk, having a target of savings as of day one is a wonderful target. I wouldn't mind seeing that as a target, but I don't see it as a threshold that we have to meet before we go forward. And I think it's a worthwhile target. And maybe it's a high bar target, but it's a target. That's all. And if it works that way, great for everybody. If it works on some sliding scale down the years, that may be very workable too. I mean, probably would be, but I don't mind seeing a target, but I don't see it as a hard goal, a hard objective.
So, Mary, I'm thinking about your point on taxes and how that might constrain the consultants. So right now, 4 of you have stated an aversion to creating a tax to do this. So I think that sends the message that we want to see what it looks like without a tax. And because I feel like if it comes back that it's not feasible under putting it in the fee, the user, on the bill, but it does come back, it's feasible if we throw in a tax to do it, I feel like that gives us an answer right there. So feeling like constraining the consultants into not putting a tax on there, I think that's a good condition to put out, since we all seem to be in agreement that we don't want to impose a tax. We might as well just set that out right up front, is that look at it, putting it all on the water bill, how does that work out?
I agree. I also think, going to the comments that so many people have made about transparency, that if we get to a report, whenever that may be, if we can see very clearly, okay, it's feasible without with a tax, it's not feasible without one, then I think that's something that we should bring back into the public's domain, not through a vote, but I think through public communication again. I think that would be an important part of us for us to do as far as consideration.
So are you thinking about leaving it open then?
I'd like to see very clearly, what it would be, how close can we get without a tax, and what the difference would be, what the tax would have to be. But, you know, I would rather have it not be in a tax way.
So I have a question. Because if it turned out that we were going to purchase CalAm or pay them, that has to be done within 30 days of the decision?
Yeah, proceeds.
And so how would you do that without having something like a 218 or I mean, how would you finance that? I don't know, that's jumping way ahead, but.
It's jumping quite a bit ahead, but there's a couple different issues we need to separate. One is the Prop 218 relative to rates and charges. And as we've talked about it, we've got a series of inquiries going into our Prop 218 attorney about how and when do you need to vet the charges. Can you take the existing rate structure and leave it in place without having to do it, a Prop 218 or not? The debt piece is one where once the court rules, the jury rules, and then you have 30 days to deliver the proceeds for the purchase. So you basically have a debt issuance sitting on the shelf ready to go, and you sell it and you take the proceeds. And then if instead the company says, well, we don't want your proceeds, we're going to appeal it, which is kind of an odd duck because there's a 60-day window for that, for an appeal. But you would know at the end of the 30-day period whether they took your money or not. You could either have an unexpended proceeds call built in where you return the investor's dollars, or there's other ways to deal with it in the structuring of the debt. Another completely different example is an interim financing where your bank uses its balance sheet. This is what happened in Missoula. And then once you clear all your legal hurdles and you're ready to go with the takeout financing, the permanent financing, then you do the permanent financing. So in Missoula's case, they did the interim financing, interim notes off of the balance sheet of the investment bank, and then in 2 weeks from now, they'll be doing the takeout financing. So there's different ways to do it, but
Well, I guess that gets to the difference between, I think we all agree that the cost should be on the rates. But if at the end you have to depend on some sort of a tax in order to make that payment, I mean, obviously that maybe has to be considered in the product.
right, and we wouldn't want to be in that position. That's why we hired or will hire these folks up front, basically to say, give us your expert opinion that there's a credit-worthy structure based on the rates of a utility we don't currently own that would put us in a position to deliver the proceeds within 30 days of a court decision and then repay that debt through the enterprise. I mean, so we want them to say that up front and also tell us, and here's all the things you're going to have to do. Here's the rate covenant. You're going to always have set rates and charges at a level to produce this much more money than your debt and things like that. And so we should have a good read on that as part of the feasibility process, because if you show that it's economic but you can't actually issue the debt to do it, then it's not feasible. So yeah, we do need to know that up front. And I think the direction, I've heard no Mello-Roos, which is a special tax, no general obligation, separate tax. I think that's pretty good direction that we're already seeing here. So,
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, where are we going with this? What, it's 9:20.
We're discussing.
Do you have enough information?
yeah, I think what we would do is, when we have our all-hands meeting, we'll elevate this to a discussion item among the group and say, what do you see as the pros and cons? Certainly, what I alluded to earlier, which is run all the modeling and see what it tells us, and then sit down and say, is it telling a good enough story, is one of the possibilities. I mean, we already know what the criteria can be, but if we're hearing that, some of the passionate speakers, those are all good reasons to raise in your bench trial about what's in the public interest. Do we have enough to tip the scales? don't know. We'll have to make that decision when we see it.
So what do you need, sorry.
Go ahead.
So what do you need from us at this
I
point?
think we've got it. I think we'll come back at the next meeting and try to do closure. We'll be able to report back what the consulting team kind of said on this issue and just go from there.
But through the chair, one more thing, water rights. I think that's an issue we haven't talked about, and I hope that you and the consultants and Mr. Laredo talk about the water rights. I think we own some. I think Cal-Am owns some. And how would that come up in this? Do we need to hire an attorney for water rights to cover that? That's going to be another big issue that needs to be done.
Yeah,
So,
it'll fit into the valuation of, what's the water right worth. And there's a real disparity between what number you put on it.
okay.
But we'll talk about that.
All right, thank you.
All right, and then I'll wrap up the discussion. We'll move on to our next item. Item number 12, consider options for assignment of rule number 19.8, responsibilities to standing committee or new committees to be established.
Through the chair, I was going to suggest that we maybe continue those two items and move to our action item. Is that a problem for the staff?
Continue to follow the seating meeting?
Items 12
No,
and
go.
13?
You mean move to go out of order?
No, move those to continue them to the next meeting. Only because it's almost 9:30. And we still have an action item.
Yeah, and I don't think it would have any effect and it would shorten the meeting. I think that just briefly on item 12, at some point we need to work out how we're going to report out to the public what we know when we know it. We don't have enough to do that now anyway. We can set that for the next board meeting because we're not going to have any reportable information really until probably two board meetings.
I'm fine with that too.
On the
next meeting.
And on the 3-year goals, this is for your information anyway. I'll be setting one-on-one appointments with you in March where you'll have a chance to go through this with me on things that are remain to be accomplished. Generally speaking, we've accomplished most everything, but I'll be listening to your goal setting to come back to you in April with discussion on goals. So this is just for your background anyway. So that's all good.
Just through the chair, just on 12, I've been hearing a lot of committees come up. I heard one tonight. They won't serve now. I hope you and Mr. Laredo come up with the pros and cons of having a standing committee. I hope that y'all call around to these other cities or that had to do this and find out what did they do. I just want to know. I like some history. And I agree with Director Byer that we should continue with until we get all that because I've been hearing a lot about it. And I need the pros and cons of it.
I'll make a motion, we continue item 12 and 13 to next meeting.
Second.
Okay.
Actually, do we even need to continue item 13? It's information only?
It's a discussion item.
It's part of your motion.
Okay, it's part of the motion.
Aye. Seconded.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Moving on to item number 14 then. Action item to approve the authorization of funds for district council's retention of experts in support of Rule 19.8 analysis.
And as you recall, District Council reported out from closed session that authority had been given unanimously for him to hire the 3 consultants in the categories as listed in this staff note. This would authorize the funding for those positions.
Okay, thank you. Directors, any questions? And then we'll open it up to public comment.
I'm a little unclear about, it seems like this item happened at the closed session. So just looking for some clarification about what's different between what you're doing now and what you did in the closed session.
Sure.
Wait till it was
Well, okay, she gave me the nod. In closed session, District Council was authorized to hire the consultants subject to passage of this action item in open session authorizing funds. So we discussed the qualifications of the various consultants, agreed that they were good and competent and would provide a good service, and that he is authorized to hire them, but only if the money is released here right now.
Well, I'm sorry I sat down, so I just thank you for that. And it just seems it's a little like what you were just talking about not having facts. I mean, the public's completely in the dark, so I don't see how we can really make any reasonable comment about.
Can you
or
name,
just saying, oh,
can you name the lead consultant for our Los Padres Dam studies?
Say again?
Who's the lead consultant for the Los Padres Dam studies?
I don't know.
Okay.
Can I find that out? I mean, I can't find that out either, right? I
No,
just
you
don't
can
know.
find it.
Oh, okay, all right. All right. Well, thank you.
About to get in trouble.
It's all right. Is there anybody wishing to speak? Okay. Mr. Bruno.
Paul Bruno, very short comment. I understand the district has a desire to have certain things remain confidential. I can understand the work product of these particular people possibly remaining confidential. I had issues with not releasing the names of who would be considered because that part doesn't seem to be confidential. But look forward to hearing who they might be. And no, I do not know who's doing the other study, but I wasn't interested in that. So,
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Bruno.
Kevin Dayton, Government Affairs Liaison, Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. I mentioned this earlier. I guess what I'd be interested in knowing is 2 of the contracts are being awarded not with competitive bidding, and the third one was going to be awarded with competitive bidding if you had had enough people qualified to actually bid on it. And it's too bad in the staff report you just didn't have something in there indicating what in state law actually allows you to use these different ways of taking contracts. I guess, public, their professional service agreements. And also, it would be good for you to just say explicitly why you think that these groups should not be named. If you're concerned that members of the public are going to contact these particular companies and start harassing them with their viewpoints, I think it would be good to let people know that, because otherwise it's like, well, who are these people? What's the big secret? You don't see too often contracts being awarded to mystery firms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Turner, Monterey again. I suspect that the Pro-Cal-Am folks want to know all about the consultants and want them to be identified and everything, so that Cal-Am can know who they are and can try to compromise or discredit them.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Anybody else wishing to speak on this item?
Jeff Davey, Chair of the Coalition of Businesses. We don't share the concern of the prior speaker. In fact, we sent a letter to the general manager. He responded. We understood his response, and we're okay with the process that has been outlined. We do look forward to finding out who they are when we get to know it, but we'll wait for that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. Anyone else wishing to speak?
I'll reiterate that we're spending over $500,000 on consultants. It's public taxpayer money. I'm asking that. I think that the public should know who they are and what their scope of work is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carbone. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, I will close public comment.
Madam Chair, if I could just comment on some of the points that were raised.
Yes, please.
These are all professional services. There is no requirement under law for these to be competitively bid. You don't want to have your experts provide the basis on the lowest cost proposal. You want to get proposals that are the most competent, and that's the reason that there is no public bid requirement for that. These are experts. They will be providing information to your attorneys to inform their legal opinion to you. It is common for experts not to have their identities released when there is anticipated litigation. There is a very specific process by which the identity of experts are exchanged between the parties in litigation, and there is a distinct disadvantage to revealing the names of experts in advance. That's one of the reasons that the civil discovery has a very specific process by which witness lists are exchanged, and we are proceeding under the advice of your special counsel, eminent domain counsel, and under my advice. These contracts are not contracts that are entered into by this district. They're contracts that are entered into by my firm under your general direction, and this is causing the funds to be released to compensate for the actual expense of these experts. Eventually, their work will be made known, their identities will be made known, but this is not the time to do so, and this board did direct that their identities be kept in confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laredo. Directors?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the sums as noted.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Byrne, second by Director Adams. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah. May I speak on a second? I would like to see, I think it's time to come up with a number, how much we have spent. You're going to talk to a lot of lawyers, so the public might as well know how much we have spent talking to all those lawyers. So I think this is part of it, but I think it's time the public know that we're spending money and we're talking to lawyers and it's going to cost us so much. But I also like to say this. If the 5 cities was doing what we're doing up here right now, I bet you wouldn't know what each one of those cities are doing. They wouldn't tell you. They wouldn't tell you. So I don't feel bad about this. I'm telling you the cost. I'm telling what we're hiring. We are. And the general manager even spoke when he spoke to the 5 cities, the 5 divisions, and told them what we are going to hire. So you don't know the name. You'll probably find out the name, but we're doing what's best. We're doing what each city would do. There's nothing that different out of this. No council, nothing different. So I just want to make sure that you all know that we're trying to be as transparent as possible. But a lot of stuff you won't find out until the process is over. And then you can ask for all of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Edwards. Is there any other discussion? Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So, following their informational staff reports, which we're not going to discuss tonight, and so then I will adjourn the meeting